have summoned you all here for the 10th annual reaping ceremony, in which we choose 2 children from each district to fight to the death in the Hunger Games.
From District 12, Lucy Gray Baird.
There has been a change this year. As a mentor, Mr. Snow, your role is to turn these children into spectacles, not survivors.
Suzanne writes very cinematically, and she probably understands, having worked on the other movies, what does and does not translate. And I suspect she's also smart enough not to be too precious about what is gained and what is lost. But when you walk in there, is it a different experience than the other books, which I think had been published when you were starting to work on them?
We were all very curious about, what sort of story she wanted to tell and what the themes were going to be and all of that. But, the writing was the same, and she does think very cinematically. She actually started from writing screenplays for children's television. So she's very, in tune with what a screenplay needs, and also really good with the adaptation process because of that.
Feels like the district have style but no money, whereas people in the Capitol have money but no style.
I wanted this time around, because of what we have for Lucy Gray in this rainbow dress, to show that District 12, besides the coal mining area, that they have this really, like a heritage of dance and singing and celebration before the Capitol has had their hands so controlling them. So I kind of flipped it this time around, and I went with more color and patterns in the district. And then in the Capitol made them much more controlled and classic and contained. Whereas in the later films, or the earlier films, it's more colorful in the Capitol. So I kind of wanted to flip that around this time so that we could show that the districts have all this life and this happiness, and it's really the Capitol that people are living under the thumb of the government.
So you are 64 years before, and I guess if we're thinking modern day world, we're kind of post-war, late post-war. Is that part of your thinking? Because it does feel, you're shooting in Germany, but it feels post-war Germany, but also post-war America in terms of the suits and what people are wearing. Was that part of the conversations?
We really looked at post-war Berlin as kind of an anchoring point for us in terms of a lot of choices. Like, what is the rubble in the streets? How are they rebuilding the classical buildings? What are the new buildings that are being erected? What are the color palettes? We even started to look at that time period in, the late 40s, even early 50s, in terms of technology, in terms of, hair, makeup, all of those things. That kind of became the era we looked at for a lot of our aesthetic choices.
When you get on set, is it ever an issue that the color doesn't work on set? I'm thinking about the red behind us. There are all sorts of different reds. The red against the gray, do you know what that's going to look like photographically, or do you try many iterations of red in terms of depth and richness of the color to see how it photographs against the sets? Do you have that kind of time?
By the time we get to set, we know what everything's going to be in general. We have a sense of what the sort of, like if you're thinking about Gall's lab, we've seen iterations of the costume. We've done costume tests with Viola in the lab coat. We know what that red is like. Yo, the cinematographer, and I have already talked about during the day, the lab might have like a cyan kind of quality, and at night it might be a little more amber. Uli and I have, talked about, all of this, and has been part of all these conversations. So by the time we're doing it, we really know how all of this stuff is going to work. Occasionally you get surprised by something, there's always something that slips through the cracks, but in general, we really have a very solid idea of how it's all going to work.
And what about the Capitol Academy? They're almost unisex, it feels like. They have their tunics, but they also have kind of almost a skirt element. How would you describe your design philosophy for what the Academy students are wearing?
We see several films with school uniforms in them, and a lot of very iconic, so I wanted to do something completely different. And in my mind, it was the thing with the Capitol, again, seeing the locations, and I asked Francis after seeing the locations, can I use red? Because there was so much gray. And I like the idea of seeing the students go up the stairs, just like, these veinings of blood that all flow into the Capitol. And I wanted them to, again, have something very classic about the uniforms, but then let us move a bit forward, it wouldn't really look like the 40s and the 50s, because again, these people in the Capitol and these students, I feel, are of youth today. They're the more fashion forward. They're the ones that are on the edge of things.
When you are working on a movie that has a huge fan base, and yet you're working in a different world that's preceding what those fans are going to come to love, how do you manage to be true to what those fans might want and what the books say and what you want to do in a new world with new characters and new actors to create something new? So where's that tension in terms of, mindful of the fans, but also creating new worlds that you think are distinct from the other films?
The biggest tension for me was before reading the manuscript, when I was just wondering what the appetite would be for a Hunger Games movie without Katniss, right? But then I read the manuscript and I fell in love with the story. And the truth is, that's all I kind of need to want to sort of commit to trying to figure something out and challenge myself to make it. And I fell in love with the story. I'm also a fan of the books, and I'm a fan of the fans, and I understand what they love about it. And so the truth is that when we make these decisions and we're sort of trying to find the kind of history, and it's almost like doing kind of archaeology on these things, it's all based out of loving these stories and loving these characters and loving the world and what it's all about. So I never worried for a second about pleasing the fans. I just worried whether or not people wanted to see a Hunger Games movie without Katniss.
Mm-hmm. There are some little Easter eggs, right? Is it a Primrose and a Katniss that if you watch this movie on your laptop, you're going to miss? But thank goodness we have big screens here with high definition projection. Do you do that in other places where there's like a little Easter egg? Because I noticed that. I suspect people who know the stories notice that as well.
Yeah, I did want to have a few Easter eggs, whether it's even just for myself, that tied in, the previous films, especially Katniss and like Snow, tying them into the new characters. And also, it was a thing I wanted to offer to Rachel as well, because I knew there'd be a lot of pressure she's not Jen Lawrence, she's not Katniss. Right. And so I wanted to kind of give her this little shield to move forward with, of saying, there is a little Katniss with you on this corset, and there's also Primrose and then the snakes. So that I did, selfishly and also for the film. And we had a great team that did all the hand painting. Like I mentioned, we had to do 10 of those in exactly the same. And, there's that one. And then there's kind of at the end with Tom, when he's the new man and he goes to see High Bottom. There's a costume that I put on Donald Sutherland in Catching Fire that's the same color, the same kind of shoulder, a little bit more, futuristic in shape, but it was kind of mimicking that and showing where this transition could lead.
Suzanne has a ear for music. She's written lyrics. How do you go about honoring what she's written and making sure it's something, A, your actor can perform, and B, sounds right as played?
She said there was going to be a music element to this, and I was very curious. And then I read it, and I was amazed that there was all this music, and obviously, a main character that's a performer and a singer. And the great thing is that Rachel, one of the reasons we cast her, is she's truly a remarkable singer. The only worry was that most of the singing we'd heard sounded like West Side Story. It was sort of Broadway kind of singing. Was she going to find the voice of Lucy Gray for this music? She fell right in. She totally got it. She totally nailed it. We did these pre-records that were more like rehearsals, but then she was actually able to sing live, and she sang live
to picture
on set every day.
Wow.
Every day. So whether it's a performance in the Hob, on mic, or whatever, or with the Snakes, anytime she sings in this movie, she sang live on the day.
Impressive. Last question: what was the biggest creative challenge for you on this shoot?
Yes.
What was the biggest? No. I can even narrow it. Was it limited to what you're doing on this film, or did it have to do with what has come after?
I think the biggest challenge on this was, as Francis mentioned, like, what's the appetite for seeing the film again, and knowing that all the other films have this really large element of what the Capitol looked like, and the big hair, the big costumes. So it was trying to figure out how we could be true to the story that we wanted to tell and what Suzanne wrote, and make it really interesting and something new to see that's quite different, but just still have this appeal. So the biggest challenge was that, and the rainbow dress.
Right. And what you're talking about is honoring the past in a way, and also being present and creative in the present. It seems like backward timelines, but I think that's the way it worked. What about for you? What was the biggest creative challenge
I
in
mean,
this?
I think sort of beyond the worry that we've already talked about, I think once we got into creating the story, it was in the adaptation process. The biggest challenge for us, me, Suzanne, the screenwriters, Nina, the producer, was, we knew we were telling the story about a young man's descent into darkness. And this is a story where we have to get an audience behind the person they know is the villain of the other movies. And so it was this trying to get people to empathize with him, be able to relate to him, be, wanting to get an audience rooting for him. I think that was the biggest challenge.
Francis and Trish, I want to thank you for coming out and for making this film.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank
Thank
you.
you.